Some people become family by blood, others become family because they refuse to let go. The November wind swept through the cracked bus shelter on the edge of Queens, carrying the smell of rain, gasoline, and the first hints of winter. 12-year-old Noah hugged his worn backpack tighter against his chest while his older sister Elena Brooks quietly zipped up his thin jacket for the third time that morning. She smiled as if everything was perfectly fine, even though her own sweater was too light for the cold and her fingers had turned pale from the biting air. At 26, Elena had learned that fear became easier to hide when someone smaller was watching. Noah looked up at her with tired blue eyes. "You skipped breakfast again, didn't you?" She laughed softly and brushed a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "I had coffee." He frowned because both of them knew coffee wasn't breakfast. Before he could argue, the old yellow school bus appeared around the corner. Elena knelt just enough to straighten the collar of his jacket. "You remember what we talked about?" He nodded. "Stay inside after school. Wait until you get a text from you. Don't walk home alone." "Exactly." The bus door folded open with a familiar hiss. Noah climbed aboard, then suddenly turned back and wrapped both arms around her. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make every exhausting overnight shift, every unpaid bill, and every impossible decision feel worth carrying. When the bus disappeared into traffic, Elena finally allowed herself one long breath before checking the time. 7:23. She had exactly 22 minutes to reach Mercy Community Medical Center before another 12-hour shift began. She hurried through crowded sidewalks where construction workers grabbed coffee, office employees rushed beneath umbrellas, and delivery trucks blocked half the street. New York never slowed down for anyone, especially not for someone trying to survive paycheck to paycheck. Inside the hospital, fluorescent lights erased the gray morning outside. Elena changed into fresh navy scrubs and tied her hair into a simple ponytail. The emergency department was already buzzing with voices, rolling stretchers, ringing phones, and the steady rhythm of monitors that never seemed to rest. "Morning, Brooks," charge nurse Linda called while handing over a clipboard. "You're on pediatric observation and overflow today." Elena accepted the assignment with an appreciative smile. Children were exhausting in a different way, but they reminded her why she had chosen nursing in the first place. They still believed tomorrow could be better. Around noon, after helping calm a frightened little girl waiting for stitches and comforting an elderly veteran whose family couldn't arrive until evening, Elena finally slipped outside the employee entrance for 5 quiet minutes. She pulled out the peanut butter sandwich she had packed but never intended to eat. Her phone vibrated. Noah. A picture appeared on the screen, his science project, a crooked model bridge made from popsicle sticks. Underneath it, one message: "Think it'll get an A?" Elena smiled so naturally that she didn't notice someone watching from across the street. A black SUV waited beside the curb, polished until it reflected the cloudy sky like dark glass. The driver remained inside. Another suited man stood beside the rear passenger door, speaking into a discreet earpiece. They looked completely out of place outside a neighborhood hospital. Elena noticed them only because a frightened pigeon fluttered across the sidewalk after one of the men stepped forward. She looked away immediately. Wealthy people visited hospitals every day. It wasn't her business. Unfortunately for her, someone inside the SUV had already noticed the young nurse laughing at her brother's message. Less than 50 feet away, a pair of calm grey eyes followed the warmth in her expression instead of the phone in her hand. The man sitting behind the tinted glass rarely paid attention to strangers. He noticed patterns instead. He noticed sacrifice. He noticed people who instinctively protected someone weaker than themselves. His name carried enough influence to silence rooms, but Elena Brooks had never heard it before. She simply folded the untouched sandwich back into its paper bag and hurried inside after hearing her pager sound again. At that exact moment, 2 blocks away, Noah stepped out of school earlier than expected because a water main break had cancelled afternoon classes. He reached for his phone to text his sister, unaware that the battery had quietly died during math class. The distance between them was less than 3 miles. Before sunset, it would feel much farther than that. The afternoon rain arrived without warning, turning the hospital windows into sheets of silver that blurred the city beyond. Elena Brooks barely noticed. The emergency department had become louder by the minute as nurses hurried between rooms, physicians exchanged quick updates, and families waited with the quiet hope that every hospital seemed to carry. She glanced at the clock above the nurses' station. 3:15. Noah should have been sitting in the school library, exactly as they had planned that morning. She smiled to herself, imagining him pretending to read while secretly sketching bridges in the margins of his notebook. Her pager interrupted the thought. A young boy with a sprained ankle needed reassurance more than treatment. Elena crouched beside him until his breathing slowed, explaining every step before the physician entered. The child's mother squeezed Elena's hand with grateful eyes. Moments like that reminded her why exhaustion always seemed worth surviving. Less than 3 miles away, Noah stepped out of the school building, carrying his backpack over one shoulder. Students scattered in every direction beneath umbrellas, while teachers apologized for the unexpected early dismissal caused by the broken water main. Noah reached into his pocket for his phone. The screen remained black. He pressed the power button twice before sighing quietly. The battery had finally given up. He knew his sister would worry if he walked home alone, but borrowing a stranger's phone felt uncomfortable, and the city bus stop was only 2 blocks away. He decided to follow the route they had walked together dozens of times. What Noah did not know was that someone else had already noticed the unusually young boy navigating the crowded sidewalk by himself. Back at the hospital, Elena finally found 30 seconds to unlock her own phone. No new messages. She frowned. Noah almost always sent something after school, even if it was only a photograph of an unusually shaped cloud or a joke he had heard from a classmate. She told herself not to overthink it. The school library probably had poor reception again. Across the street, the black sport utility vehicle remained parked beneath a row of bare maple trees. Rain collected on its polished surface before sliding silently toward the pavement. The driver watched the hospital entrance with patient discipline while another suited man quietly received updates through a hidden earpiece. Neither of them spoke unless necessary. Inside the rear passenger seat, the man with calm grey eyes looked through a folder that had nothing to do with hospitals. His attention shifted only once when Elena appeared briefly near the entrance to help an elderly patient into a waiting taxi before disappearing inside again. He watched the interaction without changing expression. She moved with the instinct of someone who protected first and questioned later. That small detail stayed with him longer than he expected. Unfortunately for Elena, the city had already begun rearranging both of their lives without asking either of them for permission. Noah reached the corner where traffic slowed beneath a blinking pedestrian signal. The rain had become heavier now, soaking through his hood despite his effort to pull it tighter. A neighborhood grocery store stood on the opposite side of the street. He remembered that the owner usually allowed students to wait inside during storms. He hurried toward the crosswalk, careful to stay behind the painted white line exactly as his sister had taught him years earlier. Back inside the hospital, Elena's shift finally slowed for the first time all afternoon. She poured herself a cup of coffee that had already cooled before taking a single sip. Linda noticed the distracted look on her face. "Everything all right?" Elena forced a reassuring smile. "My little brother forgot to text me. It is probably nothing." Linda nodded kindly. "It usually is." She reached for her phone again anyway, still nothing. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline as evening settled over Queens. The first streetlights flickered alive one by one, reflecting against rain-covered pavement like scattered stars. Somewhere beyond those wet streets, a brother was trying to make it home. Somewhere else, a powerful man quietly closed the folder in his lap and gave a single calm instruction to the driver. The vehicle pulled away from the curb for the first time that day. Neither Elena nor Noah saw it happen, but before the sun disappeared completely, their paths were already moving toward the same unavoidable destination. Rainwater rolled off the awning above the grocery store entrance as Noah stood just inside the automatic doors, hugging his backpack while watching traffic crawl through the soaked streets. The store manager smiled kindly and handed him a small paper cup filled with warm hot chocolate. Noah thanked him politely, holding the cup between both hands to warm his fingers before glancing once more at his lifeless phone. He knew Elena would be worried by now. She always worried. Every extra minute away from home felt heavier because she had spent years teaching him that staying together was the safest way to survive a city that never seemed to notice children growing up too fast. Across town, Elena removed her stethoscope after helping another patient and checked her phone again. The silence on the screen no longer felt ordinary. She called Noah anyway, listening until the call reached voicemail. She tried the school office next, only to hear an automated recording explaining that classes had ended early because of an emergency plumbing issue. Her heartbeat slowed for only a second before rising even faster than before. If school had dismissed hours ago, Noah should already have been home. She thanked the receptionist, slipped her phone into her pocket, and quietly asked Linda if she could leave as soon as another nurse arrived. Linda studied her expression for only a moment before nodding. "Go find your brother." Elena changed out of her scrubs in record time, throwing on her light sweater before hurrying into the cold evening rain. The city felt louder than usual. Taxi horns echoed between buildings while buses sprayed water across crowded sidewalks. Every teenager wearing a backpack made her look twice before realizing it was someone else. Less than a mile away, the black sport utility vehicle moved through traffic with effortless patience. Inside, the man seated in the rear watched the city pass behind rain-covered glass without speaking. His driver quietly mentioned that the scheduled meeting had been postponed because of weather. The man gave only a slight nod before his attention shifted toward the sidewalk ahead, where dozens of people hurried beneath umbrellas. Then he noticed something different. A young boy stepped away from the grocery store entrance after thanking the owner with a respectful smile. The child carefully looked both ways before beginning to cross with the changing signal. The man watched for only another second before looking away, assuming the boy would disappear into the crowd like everyone else. Unfortunately, the evening had other plans. Elena reached the subway station and boarded the first train heading toward Queens. Every stop felt painfully slow. She replayed the morning in her mind, remembering Noah's hug before school and the way he had reminded her to eat breakfast. Guilt settled quietly beside fear. She should have packed him a portable charger. She should have insisted that he borrow a friend's phone if anything unexpected happened. She should have been there. At that exact moment, Noah noticed an elderly woman struggling to keep several grocery bags from slipping into the rain-soaked street. Without hesitation, he placed his backpack beneath the covered bus bench and hurried over to help gather the scattered bags before they rolled into traffic. The woman thanked him with watery eyes while he walked beside her toward the corner. His small act of kindness delayed him by less than 2 minutes. Those 2 minutes changed everything. The black sport utility vehicle slowed at the next intersection as pedestrians crossed beneath the glowing white signal. The driver eased to a complete stop. Through the windshield, the man in the rear seat watched the same young boy helping the elderly stranger carry heavy bags without asking for anything in return. Calm gray eyes lingered a little longer than before. People often revealed their character through moments they believed nobody was watching. Noah never noticed the vehicle beside the intersection. He simply handed the final grocery bag back to the smiling woman, waved politely, and hurried toward the bus bench where his own backpack still waited beneath the shelter. Elena emerged from the subway into the cold evening air and immediately started running toward the apartment. Rain soaked her hair within seconds, but she barely noticed. Her breathing became faster with every block she passed. Streetlights reflected across the wet pavement like broken pieces of gold, while distant sirens blended into the endless heartbeat of New York. Somewhere ahead, she prayed that Noah was already waiting safely at home. Somewhere nearby, a powerful stranger had just witnessed a small act of compassion that reminded him of something he had almost forgotten, and without fully understanding why, he quietly instructed the driver to remain where they were for just a few more minutes. Elena turned the final corner toward their apartment building, with rain dripping from her sleeves and her heartbeat refusing to slow. The narrow brick building looked exactly the same as it had every evening for the past 4 years. The porch light flickered. Water collected along the cracked sidewalk. An old bicycle leaned against the railing outside apartment 3. Everything looked ordinary except for one thing. Their living room window was completely dark. She climbed the stairs 2 at a time, unlocked the apartment door, and called Noah's name before she had even stepped inside. Silence answered her. She checked his bedroom first. The bed remained perfectly made. His school books were still stacked neatly on the desk where he had left them that morning. The knot in her stomach tightened. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, pulled her phone from her pocket, and hurried back into the rain. Every block carried another possibility. Maybe he had stopped at the library. Maybe he had visited the community center. Maybe he had waited for the storm to pass somewhere warm. She repeated those hopeful thoughts with every step because the alternatives were too frightening to consider. Less than a mile away, Noah sat beneath the bus shelter with his backpack resting beside him. The rain had become steady instead of violent, creating a soft curtain that blurred passing headlights into long streaks of gold and white. He looked at the empty battery screen one more time before slipping the phone back into his pocket. The city bus should have arrived 15 minutes earlier. A digital display above the shelter flashed another delay caused by traffic congestion. Noah sighed quietly and looked down the street, wondering if walking home would actually be faster. Across the intersection, the black sport utility vehicle remained parked without attracting attention. Most people assumed it belonged to another wealthy executive waiting out the weather. Nobody noticed the disciplined rhythm with which the driver scanned every direction before returning his attention to the road. Inside the rear passenger seat, the man with calm grey eyes closed the folder resting on his lap. His meeting had already been cancelled. There was no practical reason to remain there any longer. Then he looked through the rain once again and saw the same young boy still waiting alone beneath the shelter. The child had not wandered impatiently into traffic. He had not complained. He simply sat quietly, protecting his backpack beneath his jacket as though whatever was inside mattered more than staying dry. The man glanced toward the driver. How long has he been there? The driver checked his watch. Approximately 20 minutes. The answer lingered in the silence that followed. At that exact moment, Elena stopped outside the neighborhood grocery store. The owner recognized her immediately. "Your brother?" he asked before she could speak. Relief washed across her face. "You saw him?" "Sweet kid." Helped Mrs. Alvarez carry groceries. Then he walked toward the bus stop. Elena thanked him without wasting another second. She turned and ran through the rain, shoes splashing across puddles while passing cars sprayed mist into the evening air. Her lungs burned, but she refused to slow down. Every instinct she possessed pushed her toward the next intersection. Noah finally stood from the bus bench after another delayed arrival appeared on the display. He adjusted the straps of his backpack and looked carefully at the pedestrian signal. The walk sign illuminated. He stepped forward with the same cautious patience his sister had taught him since childhood. The black sport utility vehicle rolled forward as the traffic light changed, stopping once more behind the painted crosswalk. Through the rain-covered glass, the man noticed Noah pause halfway across the intersection. A frightened golden retriever had slipped free from its owner's leash and stood trembling near the center median, confused by the noise and flashing lights. Without hesitation, Noah slowly approached the frightened dog, speaking in a calm voice. The animal relaxed almost immediately. Moments later, an elderly man hurried across the sidewalk calling the dog's name. Noah smiled, returned the leash, and quietly continued toward the opposite curb, as though helping strangers was the most ordinary thing in the world. The grey eyes inside the waiting vehicle followed every second of the exchange. Respect was not earned through speeches. It appeared in small decisions made when nobody expected recognition. Elena reached the corner just as the pedestrian signal began counting down again. She searched every face through the rain, desperate to find one familiar figure among dozens of umbrellas moving in every direction. She was only seconds away from seeing the person she had been searching for all evening, and she had no idea that someone else had already begun paying attention to both of their lives. Elena stopped so suddenly that a passing commuter nearly bumped into her shoulder. Across the rain-covered crosswalk, Noah stood safely on the opposite sidewalk, still smiling politely as the elderly man clipped the golden retriever's leash back onto its collar. Relief swept across her face so quickly that it almost made her knees give way. "Noah," her voice rose above the steady sound of rain and traffic. The boy turned instantly. His eyes widened before a bright smile spread across his face. "Elena!" The pedestrian signal flashed white again, and both of them hurried toward the center of the intersection. Noah reached her first, wrapping both arms around her waist while she knelt and held him tighter than she ever had before. She closed her eyes for a brief second, breathing in the familiar scent of rain and his damp jacket. "I am sorry," Noah whispered. "My phone died after school. I waited for the bus because I knew you told me not to walk home if something changed." Elena leaned back just enough to look into his face. "You did exactly what I taught you. I was just scared because I could not find you." Noah lowered his eyes. "I should have borrowed someone's charger." She smiled through the lingering fear. "We will buy a portable battery when I get paid." He nodded immediately, already calculating how many lunches he could skip to help pay for it. Elena recognized the look because it was the same expression she saw in the mirror every morning. They both carried responsibilities that children should never have to understand. From inside the black sport utility vehicle, calm grey eyes watched the reunion without interruption. The man said nothing for several seconds. The city around him continued moving as though nothing remarkable had happened, yet he had just witnessed something increasingly rare. Neither sibling had blamed the other. Neither had complained about the rain, the delays, or their circumstances. They had simply chosen each other before everything else. The driver quietly glanced into the rearview mirror. "Should we leave, sir?" The man continued watching the siblings disappear beneath one umbrella that was clearly too small for two people. Elena held it almost entirely over Noah, allowing cold rain to soak her own shoulder without noticing. Finally, the man answered, "Follow at a distance." The driver nodded once without asking another question. He had worked long enough to recognize when curiosity had become something more deliberate. Elena and Noah walked slowly through familiar neighborhood streets. Storefront lights reflected across puddles, while the smell of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery preparing for the next morning. Noah finally looked up. "You skipped lunch again, did not you?" Elena laughed quietly despite everything. "Why does everyone know that? Because your sandwich is still in your bag." She glanced down and realized he was right. She pulled the untouched paper bag from her tote and handed it to him instead. "Then you eat it." Noah tore the sandwich in half before giving one piece back to her. "We always split things." She wanted to argue, but she already knew it would be useless. That had become their unspoken rule after their parents died. Whatever one of them had, both of them shared. Less than 2 car lengths behind, the black vehicle continued moving almost invisibly through evening traffic. The man inside noticed every small detail. The older sister always positioned herself closer to passing traffic. The younger brother constantly looked up to make sure she was smiling before he smiled himself. Nothing about them appeared rehearsed. It was simply how they lived. Unfortunately for Elena, she still believed she had disappeared into the anonymity of New York. She had no idea that someone accustomed to reading people had begun remembering every detail of her life. They finally reached their apartment building just as the rain eased into a light mist. Noah hurried upstairs first before stopping halfway across the landing. A small paper grocery bag rested neatly outside their apartment door. Elena frowned. "Did you order something?" Noah shook his head. She carefully picked up the bag and looked inside. Fresh bread, a container of homemade chicken soup, 2 apples. There was no receipt, no note, no name, only warm food that had clearly been placed there minutes earlier. Mrs. Alvarez slowly opened her apartment door across the hall with a gentle smile. "I hope you do not mind," she said softly. "Your brother helped me today, and I remembered how hard you both work. It is not much." Elena's eyes filled with grateful tears she refused to let fall. "It is more than enough, thank you." The elderly woman simply smiled and disappeared back inside. Elena looked at Noah, who quietly shrugged as though kindness from strangers still surprised him every single time. Neither of them noticed the black sport utility vehicle parked briefly across the street before disappearing into the night. Inside, the man looked one final time toward the apartment building before quietly giving another instruction. "Find out who they are." The driver answered with a single respectful nod as the vehicle vanished into the rain, carrying with it a decision that would soon change far more than either sibling could possibly imagine. The apartment smelled of warm chicken soup and fresh bread long after the rain had faded into a quiet drizzle outside. Elena sat across from Noah at the tiny kitchen table while the old radiator clicked steadily against the wall. Their apartment was small enough that every room shared the same warmth and every conversation echoed softly through the narrow hallway. Noah carefully tore another piece of bread in half before placing the larger portion onto Elena's plate without saying a word. She smiled because she knew arguing would only waste time. Some habits had become stronger than language. They finished dinner while talking about ordinary things. Noah proudly described the bridge he had built for science class. Elena listened with genuine fascination, asking questions that made him laugh. For a little while, the fear from earlier that evening faded into something gentler. It almost felt like a normal family dinner. Almost. Later that night, after Noah had fallen asleep with one of his engineering books resting across his chest, Elena quietly covered him with an extra blanket before stepping into the tiny living room. She opened her notebook and began calculating bills beneath the soft yellow glow of a single table lamp. Rent, electricity, school expenses, bus passes, groceries. Every number demanded more money than she could realistically earn, yet somehow she always found another shift to cover the difference. She rubbed her tired eyes before crossing out another expense she could postpone until next month. Across the city, inside a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, floor-to-ceiling windows reflected thousands of lights stretching toward the horizon. The same man who had quietly observed Elena and Noah now stood beside the glass with a cup of untouched espresso resting nearby. A trusted associate entered without unnecessary conversation and placed a slim folder onto the polished desk. The man opened the folder slowly. Inside were only a few pages. Elena Brooks, 26 years old, registered nurse at Mercy Community Medical Center, legal guardian of her younger brother after both parents died several years earlier. No criminal history, no outstanding debts beyond student loans, excellent employment record, community volunteer twice each month. Honorably recommended by supervisors. Noah Brooks, 12 years old, excellent academic performance, perfect attendance, multiple letters praising volunteer work and respectful conduct. He closed the folder without another question. Nothing inside surprised him. It simply confirmed what he had already suspected from watching them for less than an hour. Character left traces long before reputation did. Meanwhile, Elena remained completely unaware that someone had quietly learned almost everything about her life. She folded another unpaid utility notice before slipping it beneath a stack of papers so Noah would not accidentally see it in the morning. She refused to let financial fear become part of his childhood if she could prevent it. The next morning arrived, wrapped in pale winter sunlight. Elena woke before dawn as usual, quietly preparing oatmeal while packing Noah's lunch. She slipped a handwritten note beside his sandwich. "Good luck on your science presentation. I already know you will do great." Noah found the note at breakfast and smiled without saying anything. Instead, he quietly washed both bowls before grabbing his backpack. They left the apartment together beneath a clear blue sky that made the previous night's storm feel strangely distant. As they approached the familiar bus stop, Elena handed Noah a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. He looked at her with confusion. "Open it." Inside rested a compact portable phone charger she had purchased after finishing an unexpected overtime shift. Noah looked up immediately. "You bought this for me?" "For both of us," she answered. "Now if something unexpected happens again, we stay connected." He hugged her tightly before carefully placing the charger inside the safest pocket of his backpack. Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked quietly across the street instead of the larger sport utility vehicle from the day before. The driver remained behind the wheel while another man calmly observed from the passenger seat, speaking only once into a discreet microphone hidden beneath his collar. "They have arrived." The message traveled only a few miles before reaching the same calm grey eyes seated inside a downtown office. The man listened without changing expression before looking toward the city skyline beyond his window. He had built an empire by recognizing value long before anyone else noticed it. Yet, for reasons he could not fully explain, the two names resting inside yesterday's folder felt different from every other report that had ever crossed his desk. Back at the bus stop, the school bus pulled to the curb with its familiar hiss. Noah climbed aboard before turning to wave through the window. Elena remained smiling until the bus disappeared around the corner. Only then did she begin walking toward another exhausting shift at the hospital, completely unaware that every ordinary step she believed belonged only to her had quietly become part of someone else's careful attention. And before this new day reached its end, fate would finally place them face to face for the very first time. Mercy Community Medical Center felt unusually quiet for nearly an hour, a rare pause that allowed Elena to catch her breath between patients. Morning sunlight streamed through the lobby windows, painting long golden reflections across the polished floor while volunteers arranged fresh flowers near the reception desk. She carried a stack of patient files toward the pediatric wing when a sudden commotion near the main entrance drew everyone's attention. It was not loud. It was the kind of silence that spread because everyone else had stopped talking first. Two men in perfectly tailored dark suits stepped inside, holding the entrance open as another man followed at an unhurried pace. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried himself with the effortless confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that changed entire companies with a single sentence. Hospital administrators immediately walked toward him with polite smiles, yet he barely acknowledged the attention. Elena looked up only long enough to avoid walking into someone before continuing toward her assignment. Wealthy donors visited hospitals often. They funded equipment, research, and community programs. This was simply another important guest as far as she was concerned. What she did not know was that the visitor recognized her the moment she crossed the lobby. Calm grey eyes followed her only briefly before shifting back toward the hospital director, revealing nothing to the people surrounding him. He already knew her name, her profession, and the quiet sacrifices hidden beneath her ordinary routine. She, however, had never seen him before. Less than 10 minutes later, Elena entered the pediatric therapy room carrying coloring books for several young patients waiting through long treatments. She knelt beside a little girl who looked frightened by the unfamiliar machines nearby and quietly began drawing flowers with her until the child's nervous breathing gradually slowed. Laughter slowly replaced anxious silence. Through the partially open hallway door, the distinguished visitor paused while touring the children's wing. He did not interrupt the conversation. He simply observed the nurse sitting cross-legged on the floor instead of standing over the child. There was no audience for kindness inside that room. No cameras, no reporters, no recognition waiting afterward. Yet she gave the frightened child her complete attention as though nothing else inside the hospital mattered. The hospital director noticed where his guest was looking. "Nurse Elena Brooks," he explained with obvious admiration. "One of the finest young nurses we have. Patients ask for her by name whenever possible." The visitor offered only a small nod before continuing down the hallway. His expression remained composed, but another quiet piece of yesterday's impression settled firmly into place. Elena finally stepped back into the corridor, carrying an empty box of crayons just as the group approached from the opposite direction. She politely moved aside to allow them to pass first. One of the administrators smiled. "Miss Brooks, thank you for everything this morning." She nodded modestly. "Just doing my job." Before she could continue walking, the distinguished visitor stopped directly across from her. For the first time, their eyes met without rain, traffic, or distance separating them. His calm grey gaze carried neither arrogance nor unnecessary warmth. It simply studied details with remarkable precision. "You handled that child with extraordinary patience," he said in a measured voice. Elena offered a professional smile. She only needed someone willing to sit beside her instead of rushing her. He considered that answer for a brief moment. That is rarer than most people realize. She assumed he was another hospital donor and answered politely. "Children usually remember how you made them feel more than what you said." The director smiled proudly. "Miss Brooks has a gift." Elena felt slightly embarrassed by the unexpected praise. "I still have patients waiting." The visitor inclined his head almost imperceptibly. "Then I will not keep them waiting." She thanked him quietly before walking away without another glance. She never asked his name because she believed the conversation had already ended. Unfortunately for her, it had only begun. The visitor remained standing exactly where she had left him until she disappeared around the corner. One of his associates approached discreetly. "Would you like the afternoon meeting prepared?" The answer came without hesitation. "Reschedule it." For how long? The calm grey eyes returned toward the hallway where Elena had vanished moments earlier. "Until I finish what I came here to understand." At that exact moment, several miles away, Noah proudly presented his model bridge before an applauding classroom, completely unaware that while he was building a future from popsicle sticks and determination, his sister had just crossed paths with the one man capable of changing both of their lives forever. The rest of the afternoon passed with the steady rhythm that only a hospital could create. Elevator doors opened and closed without pause. Nurses exchanged patient updates in calm voices. Volunteers wheeled carts filled with books and flowers through bright hallways while sunlight slowly faded behind the tall windows overlooking the city. Elena finished documenting her final pediatric rounds before checking the time. Noah's science presentation had already ended. She smiled to herself, wondering whether he had remembered to speak slowly like they had practiced together the night before. Across the administrative wing, the distinguished visitor stood alone inside a conference room overlooking Manhattan. A detailed proposal rested unopened on the polished table before him, while executives waited quietly for his decision. Instead of discussing numbers, his attention remained fixed on a simple question that none of them could understand. How long has Mercy Community operated the Children's Outreach Program? The hospital director looked pleasantly surprised. "Nearly 15 years. Funding has always been our greatest challenge." The visitor nodded once before looking toward the pediatric building visible across the courtyard. "How many families receive assistance each year?" The answer came with carefully prepared statistics. But he listened only until one sentence caught his attention. Many single guardians quietly refused available support because they believed another family needed it more. Elena Brooks was among those names. She had declined financial assistance twice despite qualifying for it, not because she did not need help, but because she believed someone else needed it more. The report remained unfinished when he closed the folder. Character revealed itself again, even in paperwork. Meanwhile, Elena received an unexpected call from Noah just before the end of her shift. The portable charger had worked exactly as planned. His excited voice filled the quiet break room. "I got first place." Elena laughed with genuine pride. "I knew you would. Mrs. Taylor says the district science fair invited me next month." Elena leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a brief moment. "That is incredible." Noah hesitated before asking the question he always asked first. Elena looked toward the overtime schedule pinned beside the nurse's station. She already knew the answer would depend on picking up enough extra shifts to pay next month's rent. Even so, she never allowed disappointment into her voice. "I will be there." Even if she had not yet figured out how to make it possible. Less than an hour later, she stepped outside into the cool evening air, carrying her worn canvas tote. Autumn leaves drifted across the sidewalk while the city glowed beneath thousands of lights preparing for another busy night. She had walked only half a block when a familiar black sedan stopped smoothly beside the curb. Elena instinctively stepped back, assuming someone important was being dropped off nearby. Instead, the rear passenger door opened. The same distinguished man she had met inside the hospital stepped onto the sidewalk. He wore the same calm expression, untouched by the rush surrounding him. Two associates remained several steps behind without speaking. Elena looked around, assuming he must be waiting for someone else. Instead, he addressed her directly. "Miss Brooks." She stopped politely. "Good evening." He held out a simple business card. Heavy white paper, black lettering, nothing flashy, only a name. Alessandro Romano. Elena accepted it more from courtesy than curiosity. "Thank you. I wanted to congratulate you." She looked genuinely confused. "For what?" "For treating every patient as though they were your own family." She smiled modestly. "That is what nurses are supposed to do." Alessandro studied her for a quiet moment before answering. "Not everyone remembers that." She glanced toward the bus stop where commuters had already begun gathering. "I appreciate your kindness, but I should get home. My little brother is waiting for dinner." The mention of Noah confirmed everything he had already learned without making the conversation feel rehearsed. "Family should never have to wait longer than necessary," he replied. Elena slipped the card into her tote without looking at it again. "Then I should not keep him waiting." She offered one final professional smile before continuing down the sidewalk. She never noticed that Alessandro remained exactly where he stood until she disappeared into the evening crowd. One of his associates quietly approached. "Should we proceed with the foundation donation?" Alessandro looked toward the hospital one final time before answering in the same calm voice he used for every important decision. "No." The associate waited. Alessandro continued. "We are going to build something much larger than a donation." Less than 3 miles away, Noah carefully set 2 plates on the tiny kitchen table, believing he was simply waiting for his sister to come home from another ordinary workday. Neither of them understood that the quiet conversation outside the hospital had just become the first step toward a future neither of them had ever imagined. The following morning arrived with crisp autumn air and a sky so clear that even the tallest buildings seemed closer than usual. Elena walked Noah to the bus stop carrying 2 travel mugs filled with oatmeal because neither of them had enough time to sit down for breakfast. Noah balanced his science project certificate inside a protective folder as though it were made of glass. Elena smiled every time she caught him looking at it. "You earned that," she reminded him. "You do not have to keep checking if it is still there." Noah laughed quietly. "I know, it just feels different when something good finally happens." She rested a gentle hand on his shoulder before the school bus arrived. "More good things are coming." Neither of them realized how true those words would become. Across downtown Manhattan, Alessandro Romano stood inside the headquarters of the Romano Foundation, where executives waited around a long conference table covered with architectural renderings, financial reports, and community investment proposals. Instead of opening the scheduled agenda, Alessandro placed a single folder in the center of the table. It contained only one page. At the top were the words Mercy Community Medical Center Pediatric Expansion Initiative. The room grew silent. One executive cleared his throat carefully. "Sir, this project was not included in today's meeting." Alessandro remained calm. "It is now." Another executive studied the preliminary numbers. "This investment is considerably larger than our annual hospital budget." Alessandro looked toward the skyline beyond the glass walls before answering. Children should never receive less care because someone could not afford more compassion. No one challenged the decision. They had learned long ago that when Alessandro spoke in that measured tone, the decision had already been made. Back at Mercy Community Medical Center, Elena spent the morning comforting anxious families while preparing children for routine procedures. Shortly before noon, the hospital director called an unexpected staff meeting inside the education auditorium. Doctors, nurses, therapists, volunteers, and administrators slowly filled the seats, exchanging confused whispers about the sudden announcement. Elena found an empty chair beside Linda near the middle of the room. Moments later, the director stepped onto the stage with unmistakable excitement shining across his face. "This morning," he began, "Mercy Community Medical Center received the largest private charitable commitment in our history." Quiet murmurs spread throughout the auditorium. The director continued. "The Romano Foundation has committed to fully funding a new pediatric treatment wing, expanded family assistance programs, updated equipment, and educational scholarships for nurses pursuing advanced pediatric care." Applause erupted across the room. Elena joined everyone else, sincerely happy for the families who would benefit, never imagining that she had played even the smallest role in the decision. At the back of the auditorium, Alessandro observed the celebration without seeking recognition. His attention never remained on the stage for long. Instead, he watched Elena applauding with the same genuine enthusiasm she had shown for every patient she had comforted. She celebrated opportunities that would mostly help strangers. Once again, she asked nothing for herself. After the announcement concluded, staff members slowly returned to their departments, discussing the extraordinary news with renewed energy. Elena gathered her notebook and turned toward the exit just as the hospital director called her name. "Miss Brooks, would you stay for one moment?" She hesitated before walking back toward the front of the room. Alessandro remained standing nearby, hands loosely folded before him. The director smiled warmly. "Mr. Romano specifically requested to personally thank several members of our pediatric staff whose dedication inspired confidence in our hospital." Elena looked genuinely surprised. "I do not think I inspired anything." Alessandro met her eyes with the same calm expression she remembered from the previous evening. Sometimes character speaks louder than accomplishments. She smiled politely, still believing he was simply being generous. "The children deserve the credit. They teach us patience every day." Alessandro nodded almost imperceptibly. "And who teaches them hope?" Elena lowered her eyes for a brief second before answering softly, "Usually each other." The answer lingered in the quiet room, longer than either expected. Alessandro extended a small envelope toward her. "The foundation sponsors advanced pediatric nursing scholarships each year. I believe you should consider applying." Elena accepted it with obvious hesitation. "There are nurses here who have worked much longer than I have." "Perhaps," Alessandro replied, "but experience and purpose are not always measured by the same calendar." Before she could answer, her pager sounded from inside her pocket. Another patient needed her. She offered an apologetic smile. "Duty calls." Alessandro stepped aside immediately. "It usually does." Elena thanked both men before hurrying toward the hallway, never opening the envelope as she disappeared around the corner. Alessandro watched her leave without disappointment. Beside him, the hospital director smiled knowingly. Most people would have opened that before reaching the door. Alessandro looked toward the empty hallway where Elena had vanished. She is not most people. What neither man realized was that inside the envelope rested far more than a scholarship application. It contained the first invitation that would quietly intertwine Elena Brooks and Noah with a future neither of them had ever dared imagine. Elena did not open the envelope until long after her shift had ended. The city had already settled into another cool autumn evening by the time she reached the small apartment she shared with Noah. He was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by library books, carefully measuring pieces of cardboard for another bridge design. The moment she stepped inside, he looked up with the same bright smile that had greeted her every evening since he was old enough to understand what home meant. "How was your day?" he asked. Elena slipped off her jacket and laughed softly. "Long, but good. The hospital received wonderful news. Noah immediately pushed one of the kitchen chairs back for her before noticing the cream-colored envelope still resting in her hand. "What is that?" She looked down as though she had almost forgotten it existed. "Something the hospital director gave me after a meeting." She carefully opened the seal and unfolded the neatly printed documents. The first page described a fully funded pediatric nursing fellowship sponsored by the Romano Foundation, tuition, advanced certifications, leadership training, housing assistance during specialized coursework. Every expense had already been covered. Elena stopped reading halfway through the page. It sounded too generous to be real. Noah quietly watched her expression change from curiosity to disbelief. "Is something wrong?" She slowly shook her head. "I do not know." He moved beside her and carefully read the first few lines over her shoulder. "Elena, this is amazing," she smiled uncertainly. "It feels like it belongs to someone else." Noah frowned. "Why?" She folded the papers carefully before answering. "Because there are nurses who have worked much longer than I have. There are people with more experience." Noah looked at her with the simple honesty only a child could possess. "Do they love their patients more than you do?" Elena opened her mouth to answer but found no words waiting. Noah continued quietly. "You always tell me that opportunities should go to the people who will use them to help others the most." She stared at the envelope resting on the table. Hearing her own lesson reflected back at her somehow carried more weight than reading the official offer itself. Across Manhattan, Alessandro Romano stood alone inside his office after every executive had already gone home. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls while a single folder remained open across his desk. It was not filled with contracts or investment reports this time. Instead, architectural drawings covered the polished wood surface. New pediatric treatment rooms, family counseling spaces, overnight accommodations for parents, a learning center where children receiving long-term care could continue attending school without falling behind. Alessandro studied every page with quiet concentration before signing the final approval document. His closest associate entered moments later. "Everything has been arranged." Alessandro nodded once. "Good." The associate hesitated before speaking again. Alessandro looked up. "Go ahead. This project is larger than anything the Foundation has approved in years. Why this hospital?" Alessandro remained silent for several seconds before answering. "Because buildings matter less than the people inside them." The associate understood there would be no further explanation. Meanwhile, Elena tucked the fellowship papers back into their envelope before helping Noah prepare dinner. They laughed over burned grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup that tasted far better than it looked. Ordinary conversations filled the apartment once again. Noah described plans for the district science fair, while Elena promised to help him test stronger bridge designs during the weekend. Neither of them mentioned money, neither mentioned overdue bills. For one peaceful evening, hope quietly outweighed worry. The following afternoon, Elena returned to the hospital carrying the fellowship application inside her work bag, still completely blank. She intended to ask Linda whether applying would seem selfish. Before she found the chance, the hospital director stopped her near the pediatric nurses' station. "Miss Brooks, Mr. Romano asked me to remind you that applications close tomorrow evening." Elena looked genuinely startled. "He remembered?" The director smiled. "I believe he rarely forgets anything important." Elena thanked him politely before continuing down the hallway, but his words remained with her. Important. She had never imagined someone like Alessandro Romano would remember a nurse whose entire world fit inside a modest apartment in Queens. Less than an hour later, she paused outside a patient room and finally opened the envelope again. A handwritten note rested behind the official documents. The handwriting was precise and remarkably simple. It read, "Never underestimate what one compassionate person can change." Elena quietly folded the note and slipped it into her pocket instead of returning it to the envelope. She still did not know why those words affected her so deeply. Unfortunately for her, that small decision marked the first time she carried something from Alessandro Romano, not because she had been asked to, but because a quiet part of her heart had already begun believing that perhaps, for the first time in many years, someone had truly seen the life she had been trying so hard to carry alone. The application remained inside Elena's work bag for 2 more days. Every time she reached for it, another patient needed her attention first. A frightened child needed reassurance before surgery. A tired mother needed someone willing to explain complicated instructions one more time. An elderly grandfather wanted nothing more than someone to sit beside him while he waited for his family to arrive. By the time each shift ended, Elena convinced herself that she would complete the paperwork tomorrow. Tomorrow slowly became another tomorrow. Noah noticed the untouched envelope one evening while finishing his homework at the kitchen table. He looked at his sister with quiet curiosity. "You still have not sent it." Elena sighed and rested her forehead against her folded arms. "I keep thinking someone else deserves it more." Noah closed his math book and walked over to stand beside her. "Do you remember what Mom used to tell us?" "Which lesson?" "The one about doors." She looked up. Noah continued in the gentle voice that reminded her so much of their mother. "She always said that when life opens a door for you, it is not selfish to walk through it. It is only selfish if you close it behind you." Elena stared at the application in silence. Her mother had repeated those words countless times before illness had taken both parents from their lives. Somehow hearing them again made the tiny apartment feel warmer than it had in years. The following morning she arrived at Mercy Community Medical Center 30 minutes early. Instead of heading directly toward the nurse's station, she quietly sat inside the nearly empty employee lounge with a cup of coffee growing cold beside her. One by one she completed every page of the fellowship application. She described why she had chosen pediatric nursing. She wrote about children who needed compassion as much as medicine. She explained that every frightened child deserved someone willing to kneel beside the hospital bed instead of speaking from the doorway. When she reached the final question asking why she wished to continue her education, she paused for nearly 5 minutes before writing only one sentence, "Because every child deserves someone who never stops learning how to care for them better." She signed her name, slipped the papers back into the envelope, and carried them directly to the hospital director's office before she could change her mind. The director accepted the envelope with an unmistakable smile. "I was hoping you would decide to apply." Elena laughed softly. "So was my little brother." The director nodded knowingly. Wise young man. Meanwhile, several miles away, Alessandro Romano walked through the construction site that would soon become the expanded pediatric wing. Hard hats and blueprints surrounded him while engineers explained timelines and structural plans. He listened carefully before stopping near a large window overlooking the existing children's entrance. "I want every treatment room to have natural light," he said calmly. One architect looked surprised. "That will require redesigning an entire section of the building," Alessandro answered without hesitation. "Then redesign it." The architect nodded immediately, making careful notes. Alessandro had learned years ago that children measured hope differently than adults. Sometimes hope looked like sunlight reaching a hospital bed. Sometimes it sounded like laughter echoing through a hallway that had once felt frightening. Later that afternoon, the hospital director entered Alessandro's temporary office carrying a familiar cream-colored envelope. She submitted it. Alessandro looked up from the architectural drawings spread across his desk. He accepted the application but did not open it immediately. Instead, he rested one hand lightly across the envelope before asking a simple question. Was she smiling? The director chuckled quietly. Not at first. By the time she walked back downstairs, yes. Alessandro finally opened the application and read every word slowly. He stopped longest at the final answer, because every child deserves someone who never stops learning how to care for them better. He read the sentence twice before carefully closing the folder again. There were no dramatic declarations, no visible celebration, only a quiet certainty settling into place. Character could not be purchased, compassion could not be taught through money alone. Those qualities already existed inside people willing to protect others even when nobody was watching. That evening, Elena arrived home carrying a small grocery bag and found Noah sitting by the apartment window waiting for her. "Did you do it?" he asked before she had even closed the door. She smiled wider than she had in weeks. "I did." Noah wrapped his arms around her without another word. Outside the apartment, the first snowflakes of the season drifted gently beneath the streetlights, covering the sidewalks in a thin layer of white. Neither sibling realized that somewhere across the city, another person was quietly looking out at the same snowfall, believing that for the first time in many years, the future had finally begun moving exactly where it was meant to go. Winter settled gently over New York during the weeks that followed. Fresh snow lined the sidewalks outside Mercy Community Medical Center, while children inside the pediatric wing pressed small hands against the windows, hoping another snowfall would arrive before they were well enough to go home. Elena continued working the same long shifts she had always accepted, but something inside her had quietly changed. For the first time in years, the future no longer felt like an endless series of overdue bills and impossible choices. She still worked hard. She still hurried from room to room with the same quiet determination. Yet there was a new confidence in every step because she had finally allowed herself to believe that accepting help did not mean losing independence. One afternoon, the hospital director asked her to stop by his office after finishing her rounds. Elena knocked softly before stepping inside. The familiar office looked different now. Architectural models of the new pediatric wing covered one side of the room, while large framed renderings showed bright treatment spaces filled with sunlight, colorful reading corners, family lounges, and gardens designed specifically for recovering children. The director smiled warmly as she entered. "I have been waiting for this conversation." Elena sat carefully, unsure what to expect. He handed her a sealed folder bearing the Romano Foundation emblem. Her heartbeat quickened before she even opened it. Inside rested a single letter. "Congratulations. Your fellowship application has been unanimously approved. Full tuition, advanced pediatric certification, leadership mentoring, and family support services would begin the following semester." Elena read the first paragraph twice before lowering the letter. Her eyes shimmered with emotion she struggled to hide. There must have been many stronger applicants. The director smiled knowingly. There were many qualified applicants. There was only one Elena Brooks. She lowered her eyes, still overwhelmed. "Please thank everyone involved for believing in me." The director leaned back gently. "Perhaps you should thank Mr. Romano yourself." Before she could answer, a quiet knock sounded at the open office door. Alessandro Romano stepped inside, wearing a dark overcoat dusted with melting snow. He carried no entourage this time, no assistants, no advisors, only a simple leather portfolio beneath one arm. Elena immediately stood. "Good afternoon." Alessandro inclined his head politely. "Congratulations, Miss Brooks." She held the acceptance letter carefully. "Thank you. I still cannot believe this is real." Alessandro's calm grey eyes rested on the letter before returning to her. "Sometimes the hardest part of changing a life is convincing the right person they deserve the opportunity," Elena smiled softly. "I hope I earn the faith everyone has placed in me." "You already have," Alessandro answered without hesitation. Silence settled comfortably between them for a brief moment. Through the office windows, snowflakes drifted slowly across the courtyard where construction crews continued preparing the foundation for the new pediatric building. Elena finally gathered enough courage to ask the question that had quietly remained with her since the first day they met. "May I ask you something?" Alessandro nodded. "Of course. Why me?" The question carried no false modesty, only honest confusion. Alessandro looked toward the children playing in the courtyard below before answering. "Because I watched you protect Hope when nobody believed anyone important was watching." Elena frowned slightly. He continued in the same calm voice. "The first time I saw you, you gave your lunch away without thinking twice. Later that evening I watched you run through the rain searching for your brother with nothing except love guiding you. The next morning I learned that everything I witnessed was simply who you are every day." Elena's eyes widened. Suddenly, the rainy intersection, the delayed bus, the quiet conversations, and the unexpected scholarship all connected into one complete picture. She understood that none of it had happened by accident. Alessandro had never admired her because she was extraordinary. He had simply noticed the ordinary choices she believed no one else ever saw. She looked down at the acceptance letter resting in her hands. "I never knew." Alessandro offered the faintest smile. "You were never supposed to." The director quietly excused himself, leaving them alone beside the snow-covered window. Elena looked outside, where children laughed beneath warm winter coats despite the cold. Everything is going to be different now. Alessandro followed her gaze. "For many families, yes. I meant for Noah and me." Alessandro answered with quiet certainty. "That is exactly why I chose to begin here." As afternoon light settled across the new construction site, Elena realized that the greatest gift she had received was not the fellowship itself. It was the simple knowledge that compassion, even when unnoticed, had the power to reach farther than she had ever imagined. And for the first time since losing her parents, the future no longer felt like something she had to survive alone. Spring arrived quietly, almost as if the city itself had decided that long winters deserved gentle endings. Cherry blossoms lined the streets outside Mercy Community Medical Center, replacing snow with soft shades of pink that drifted through the morning air whenever the breeze passed between the trees. The new pediatric wing stood completed at last, its wide windows welcoming sunlight into rooms once hidden beneath fluorescent lights. Families gathered inside bright waiting areas where children laughed around colorful bookshelves and painted murals instead of staring at blank walls. Elena Brooks paused just outside the entrance before beginning her first official day as a pediatric clinical educator, the fellowship having transformed not only her education but also her confidence. She rested one hand against the polished glass door and smiled as she watched a young nurse kneel beside a frightened little boy exactly the way she herself had done countless times before. Compassion, she realized, had quietly become something that multiplied. Inside the lobby, Noah waited beside a display featuring photographs of the hospital's transformation. At 13, he stood a little taller now, carrying himself with the same quiet kindness that had always defined him. His science projects had become regional awards, and a scholarship program created through the new Children's Education Initiative had opened opportunities he had never imagined possible. When Elena approached, he handed her a folded piece of paper with a grin that immediately reminded her of the little boy she had protected for so many years. "I made something for you." She unfolded it carefully. It was a simple pencil drawing of the old bus stop from that rainy afternoon months earlier. Beside it stood a larger sketch of the hospital as it looked today. Between both pictures, Noah had written one sentence in careful handwriting. "One kind moment can build a bridge that reaches farther than anyone can see." Elena blinked away grateful tears before hugging him tightly. "This might be my favorite gift you have ever made," he laughed. "I hoped you would say that." Across the lobby, Alessandro Romano entered without ceremony. Most visitors barely noticed him because there were no cameras, no public announcement, and no dramatic arrival. He greeted hospital staff by name before stopping beside the siblings with the same calm expression Elena had come to recognize over the past several months. "Congratulations," he said, looking first toward Noah. "I heard about the regional science competition." Noah smiled modestly. "Thank you, sir." Alessandro turned toward Elena. "The nurses you mentor already speak highly of you." Elena shook her head gently. "They make the work easy," Alessandro smiled faintly. "You still give the credit away." She laughed softly because she knew he was right. They walked together through the new pediatric wing, where children painted pictures, parents shared coffee in comfortable family lounges, and sunlight poured across every hallway exactly as Alessandro had requested during construction. Nothing about the building felt cold anymore. It felt alive. Elena stopped beside one of the large windows overlooking the courtyard. Children chased soap bubbles across the grass while volunteers organized a small spring festival beneath colorful banners. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Alessandro looked toward the families filling the courtyard. "Buildings matter very little." Elena glanced at him knowingly. "People inside them matter more." "You remembered." She smiled. "I never forgot." For a quiet moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need. Some conversations reached completion long before words caught up with them. Noah ran toward the courtyard after spotting several children preparing a bridge-building contest using wooden craft sticks. Elena watched him join the group with the same protective warmth she had carried since the day their parents were gone. Only now she no longer carried that responsibility alone. Alessandro stood beside her without asking for recognition or gratitude. His presence had never replaced her strength. It had simply given her room to breathe. As the afternoon sunlight settled across the courtyard, Elena finally understood the truth that had been unfolding since the rainy day when Noah's phone battery died. Alessandro had never changed their lives because he possessed influence, wealth, or power. He changed them because he noticed ordinary goodness that everyone else had walked past without seeing, and in choosing to protect that goodness instead of overlooking it, he had quietly transformed not only 2 lives, but countless others who would one day walk through these bright hospital halls. Outside, the cherry blossoms drifted gently through the warm spring air, landing across the same kind of sidewalk where months earlier a frightened older sister had searched desperately for the little brother she refused to lose. This time they walked home together beneath clear skies instead of storm clouds, talking about tomorrow instead of worrying about surviving today, while behind them the hospital stood as a lasting reminder that the greatest acts of kindness rarely begin with grand gestures. Sometimes they begin with one exhausted nurse, one thoughtful little brother, and one stranger who chose to stop long enough to truly see them.